what we discussed already? We discussed part one, which was decision making at the individual level.
Yeah, how do we make better decisions? How do I make better decisions? Yeah.
Part two was all about group decision making, collaboration, group dynamics. I'm trying to remind myself what did we talk about?
Yeah, like the different ways groups make decisions and the role of the person playing the facilitation or wearing the facilitation hat, how that can help in different ways, but that not every team makes decisions in the same way, and not every decision requires the same approach for decision making. Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about different sources of how to recognize the different modes of decision making, which one might be appropriate in context.
And we said that we would like to have part three, which is again lifting it up one level, which is how organizations make decisions or how they fail to make decisions.
Yeah.
Let's see where this conversation goes. Um,
Yeah. So how do organizations make decisions, God? That's a big one, isn't it? Like, I think I
uh,
recognize it.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I think I recognize from my own experience that decisions made by leaders or people away from the immediate context of the work have a bigger impact than perhaps they realize. And that agility, making the right decisions at the leadership level, as in the decisions that they make at that level, they can have an amplified impact as you work through the organization. So that the people who have to stop work on one thing and start on another, you can create multiple impacts on people from, for example, we're not going to work on that anymore. Park it. We're now working on this. Um, like leaders may think, we're being agile. We're focused on making the right strategic direction for the
Yeah.
for the organization. We're giving a clear decision. This is the output of the decision, but the outcomes are people in the organization go, like I've invested so much work in figuring this out, and we think we have something really good, and suddenly now it's a pivot, and uh, I I think the point it leadership decision making has a big impact, right? And I think that is any organization.
Yeah.
Maybe that's an obvious thing to say, right? But
You know, the way I think about it, what you just said, probably there's a lot of cases where bad decisions or bad decision making hygiene translates into we're agile now we
mm,
just work on this, now we work on this, now we work on this, and it's easy to say we're so agile that we lack any decision making hygiene. uh,
can can you say more about decision making hygiene? Because you used that term, I think, in the last recording, and I meant to ask you about it at the time.
I think in this specific case it's just this idea that the thing that the idea that you change decision every day and make people switch focus into something to work on something different. You can't just say you do that because you're agile and you used the magical A word and now it's fine because
Mm,
it's agile. Um, Maybe it's not such a good idea to change focus for people every single day because
definitely.
yeah. So
There's very few definites in our game, right? But I think that's a definite.
yeah, and the thing I was thinking about when you talked about it is this uh, inertia concept of the more levels this decision needs to travel, the longer it will actually take to for it to be implemented. Like people will still, maybe the board discussed something, no, we're going in a different direction. But before that reaches the teams who are working on something super specific, there might be days, weeks, or there might be a lot of time.
Mm.
And then I thought, you said it depends, but there are some definitives. This idea of empowerment that is super fluffy, but I think it can be translated into the decisions should be pushed as close to where the work happens as possible. So it's like people doing the work should be empowered to make decisions about the work, and the less layers it needs to travel, the better, especially in a complex environment where uh, yeah, I love there is a sentence from Dave Snowden, you centralize constraints management and you decentralize decision making. And I think that's a very good rule of thumb. I don't even know if that's a rule of thumb because sometimes they don't work, right? I
Mm-hmm.
can't think of a good, maybe simple environment. Who works in a simple environment? Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. Tell me, what did you hear?
But I like how that idea sounds. It's the first time I've heard it, so I'm as always with Dave Snowden stuff, you have to think about it a little while before you can digest it. But I struggled a bit with decentralized decision making as something to bring to people to work on, because I think it's hard to override people's natural way of being, and you know you, it's hard being a manager. It's not an easy job. You're helping people, you're looking after people, and you may recognize something in yourself that you want to change. Like, I really wish I didn't keep checking in on that thing, but it's so important. I just really need to know how it's going. Like, these are not necessarily terrible impulses, right? Because
Mm,
sometimes things are very important and you just need to check in. But how that is perceived uh, can be different depending on the receiver of the request. One person's attention is another person's micromanagement, and a lot of these things are open to interpretation. But I think there's something in decentralized decision making that is definitely true, and there's a core of something valuable in there that if you can find, and the word I thought of when I was thinking about this topic before we talked today, it's negotiation. And negotiation is kind of core key to decision making, I think, at all the levels we're talking about, right? Like if you're deciding yourself, you're kind of negotiating the pros and cons, and like what should I do first? What should I do second? It's a little bit like a little bit of solo, right? But when you're in a team, it's all negotiation. Like, what comes first? What comes second? What do we do later? What do we do now? Um, and then at the top level, like, or for a manager or a leader, you know, I I told you before about the no surprises thing. I was told by someone I worked for once, just no surprises. Like, you just go do your thing, but just I don't want anyone to come to me and catch me off guard about something you're doing. So if you think that might happen, then come to me and tell me about it. And it was a
mm.
nice, like you say, rule of thumb. It was a nice rule of thumb for me. I could kind of work with that. And occasionally I'd get it wrong, and occasionally a surprise would happen. But I learned more from the things that went wrong, and kind of go, okay, I think maybe I need to be a bit more careful when saying a certain thing to a certain person, or whatever. But I think you can structure how you decide the decisions that should be decentralized. That can be a little bit structured, depending and it depends on the person you're working with. Maybe you need to be really explicit and clear and say, like, if the decision meets these two or three criteria, definitely come talk to me. You might do that with a less experienced person.
Yeah.
But if you can give someone a bit more freedom and leeway and they know what they're doing, you say, look, something like just I don't want to be caught out by not knowing what you're doing. Just like let's keep that as the starting point. And if anything changes, then we'll renegotiate. Does that does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense, and I think it's super difficult
Yeah.
to boil it down into um, this. Come ask me for a decision. But that resonates well with the post on LinkedIn that I shared with you. I don't remember who wrote it, but I remember this idea that instead of having a decision-making process, you should have a decision-making framework, in a
Mm,
sense of no, instead of having an approval process, you should have a framework.
mm,
So instead of come and ask me to approve everything for you, it should be something that allows you to make the decision following some framework. Make this decision yourself. I
mm,
think that's if we are to talk about the organization level decision making, that's something that will speed up the decision making process. So you don't have to wait for the boss to accept, especially that the boss can say, you know what, I would love to check that with my boss because it seems quite important. So, you know what happens in the organization. I need to talk to my boss, but now he's out. But so we have a one-to-one scheduled next week, Monday, and I'll just talk to him then.
mm.
Um, and if something happened, worst case scenario, yeah, that's a very important subject. So my boss wants to talk to his boss.
Mm.
And yeah, it just can go very wrong in
Yeah.
many ways if you have this chain of approvals required.
Yeah. If you're in a recurring conversation, which let's face it, it does happen, right? And you come back 2 weeks later after someone has said, "Oh, we'll catch up on that afterwards." Yeah, we don't need to talk about that in this conversation. We'll catch up on it afterwards. And 2 weeks later, so what was the outcome? Oh, like we didn't have it had to go to approval, or like it's like postpone the decision.
Yeah,
It's easier to kind of take a step away, think about it, and not do anything. Sometimes there's impediments to actually in the moment just saying, go for it. Um, and the old Lencioni book. I don't know if you like it, The Dysfunctions. Like I think there's good stuff there.
yeah, I think a lot of simplifications are very useful, or all the models are false, but some are useful, and all of this stuff. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think even sometimes even just putting that model up on screen, the pyramid with the I'm gonna betray my lack of memory now, but I always remember it's absence of trust at the bottom. Um, and it leads to absence of looking at results at the top. And he's suggesting work on the five dysfunctions in sequence, and you'll get to a point where there's conflict, but it's healthy conflict. People aren't avoiding it.
Yeah,
There's a focus on outcomes, and then there's a focus on the results, or accountability is the one, and then results. So I think there's good stuff there. It's always I never know, if you're in a conversation where people are trying to make a decision and there's conflict. Um, Sometimes it's actually a good sign, um, because the alternative is there's no conflict. Um, is that a good sign? Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
These are more it depends questions, right?
I was just unrelated to decision making, I guess, but exactly about the meetup was about social learning, and I loved the idea that uh, people who run the meetup said that they detest the word collaborative because a lot of times it translates into lack of conflict, lack of friction, uh, And in the context of community of practice, for example, that might mean a groupthink. You just enter the room and everyone is like, kumbaya. Everyone is happy, and this idea of the friction is actually, they said that it's possible to see the health. What is the health of the community by looking at if the friction is there and if what happens with it. Because if there is no friction, then it's a very bad sign.
I think I'm reflecting on my own preference there, and like I'm someone who my approach is I like to do the decision making outside the meeting where there's 12 people together, because I find that the the conversation with friction where the decision is being made, I find it happens very quickly. It's quite difficult to capture all the perspectives, and I think sometimes the outcome is inconclusive
Mm.
if you're trying to make the decision in the moment in that group, and you feel like not everybody has a chance to get to say everything they need to say, and I feel like it's an imperfect decision making setting context,
Yeah.
even if it's facilitated impeccably, with lovely kind of groups and output, all that sort of stuff. Um, so I think that kind of shuttle or caucus idea of um, obviously it needs more time, but that's an alternative to facilitating in a group setting. And if there's a chance to give the input, share it in a way that allows everybody to get involved at the level they need to. Now, I think a good sign of good health is when that happens without facilitation, right? That's great. Like that conversation I mentioned, like if it did happen, you'd be like, okay, great. You talked about it, you decided, fantastic. That's exactly what you would love to see. And maybe the conflict happened just quietly outside the call. They hammered it out and they got to an agreement. Like that's great.
Yeah.
So it's not always the conflict that you see, it's all, some of it can be below the waterline as well. Um, so yeah, it depends on a lot of things, this one.
Yes.
But I like the idea of negotiation. I'm coming back to that a lot because if you're talking about outcomes, right, which is the kind of goal, the results or the outcomes, that ability to discuss and refine and say like, I don't think 20% is feasible. Like it's going to put too much pressure on the teams. I think we should be aiming for 15. That's a stretch goal in itself. That ability to like we say, bring emotion into the conversation, challenge, but not be what's the Kim Scott term? Like, is it obnoxious, or I can't remember what she calls the people who have just challenge only,
Radical candor, was it?
radical
Yeah.
candor. Yeah, yeah. That balance of like, bring your emotions, be authentic, but don't be a jerk. You know, and that's hard. It's hard to do when you're possibly being challenged in a jerky way by someone else. So yeah, they're the kind of interpersonal challenges that go.
I like the loop we've made. Uh, this is the org level, and then we talked about the team level, and now
Yeah.
it's back to the personal level.
Well, I mean, that's Lencioni's thing, isn't it? The people at the exec level are a kind of a team, and depending on where you are, that they'll feel more like a team or less. Maybe they themselves feel it differently. Um, and it can be a chat, like that's where you see silos in organizations as well, isn't it? It's like if people are talking about only their own sort of functional area as the organization, that they care about, that's an interesting sort of thing to see. And it's like how cohesive is the group of people? How much do they understand each other? The people over the different functional
Yeah.
areas, and that's an interesting thing to observe.
Maybe the next subject we should tackle is something about silos. we've been talking about silos a little bit last week in my organization. Oh, we've been talking about silos for the past 20 years. So, and I
Hmm.
bet people before us talked about it.
Silos are great. They keep things separated.
Uh, it's like a useful way of creating some specialty or like places where people can use the same language and understand each other.
Hmm. And
I
do you
think
remember,
we should
did,
talk about
did you ever organize your paper notes into a binder? And in your binder, you would have colored dividers, right?
yeah.
Nobody says dividers for silos. They say silos. But silos are used on farms. They're good. They have a function. Dividers do too, right? So surely they're a good thing, no? I'm just being facetious now. I think the coffee's kicking in.
Let's talk about it. All right.
Yeah.